The third news item, want to get your thoughts on, JP, is a meeting next week. It's happening in Nashville. It's the Big Ten athletic directors and SEC athletic directors. Now, we already know like these two leagues are working closer together than they have in recent memory. This is the two commissioners get along. After there were some tense times, particularly around COVID, when leagues were making different decisions about whether or not they were going to play, when they were going to start the season, it was a little bit of a Cold War. Now it's warm and things are good. And a lot of these schools are dealing with the same sort of challenges and questions, like when we talk about the house settlement, and just sort of like NCAA enforcement, lots of issues. So the ADs are getting together, and the two most interesting things I think that they're going to talk about are non-conference football scheduling, possibly looking at something they could do in the regular season. I would think of like a little bit like a Big Ten ACC basketball challenge, where you kind of pair up teams that are like predicted to finish around the same, and have something like that. But there's obviously other issues. Like there's a number of SEC schools that play an ACC school each year, et cetera, et cetera. But the more interesting piece, Joshua, is they're talking again about college football playoff format. Should this thing be bigger? Should there be multiple AQs for the Big Ten and the SEC? This conversation's not going away. And I think it's pretty unpopular to a lot of fans who would rather them just get these spots by a selection committee deciding those teams are the best, instead of saying like, yep, 3 Big Ten, 3 SEC every year.
I'm that fan. I am absolutely that fan. To go back to the scheduling aspect of it, I think that could be the biggest positive out of conversations like this. And I'll use University of Michigan right now as an example. They get blasted at home by Texas, and they're a top 10 team still because nobody's out of the race. And frankly, it doesn't matter what happens in the non-con. It doesn't matter. It does matter, but it does not hurt you if you can compete in your conference. And so I do think we should try to create some of these matchups that are more intriguing. We should put these two leagues head to head against each other. Obviously great for TV, but it's great for those programs and to get a test early on so they can know where they're at. I like that. Now, the idea of, hey, just because you are the Big Ten or just because you're the SEC, you're going to have reserve spots. That, to me, does not feel like the best way to crown a national champion. Are we trying to figure out, like, who the best teams are on a year-to-year basis, or are we trying to have an invitational that does the best job of getting teams in that people like watching? That's my biggest question out of this whole thing, and I feel like college football has kind of got to pick a direction on where they want to go. But I am so traditional from the standpoint of the regular season has to matter. I think that the selection process, the voters, all that kind of stuff should matter. And just because you're in one of these top conferences, I don't think that you need to have an automatic seat at the table.
So here's what I'll say. I don't know if you'll see the enhanced scheduling without that piece, because here's the thing. Who's going to want to play an extra challenging game against one of the best teams in the other best conference, right?
Right. But if we're sitting here and we're saying that one of these teams could drop a game, right? Like we could have Ohio State going up against Georgia, and Ohio State could lose that football game. And if they win the Big Ten, they're in. And they've got to bye as it's currently set up, right? Like that's the thing for me where it's like, yeah, you get the one extra challenging game. Here's the other part about it. I think a lot of voters are willing to overlook one of those losses, particularly early in the season, if you actually play well for the rest of your schedule. So, yeah, there's a risk to it, but I think we are in a place with an expanded playoff where you can tolerate a little bit more risk. So, like, let's just go ahead and do it without having to do the part of we need the AQs as well.
Listen, I preach. Like the first thing I thought of when they proposed the 12-team playoff was please schedule harder, because now you can have a loss, 2 losses, 3 losses. Like I don't think we're ready for the resumes that we're going to be talking about in November. Like people are freaking out about Notre Dame having a loss or Georgia having a loss now. Like, no, these are going to be some flawed teams. Like we'll get to Ole Miss later because I got them in my stock down, but they're far from out of this thing. And like it is going to keep teams in the mix. So yes, please schedule them. I will say then conference realignment happened, and Georgia, Texas is a league game, and Oregon, Ohio State is a league game. Right. So I get maybe not wanting to add a ton on top of that. You also need the SEC to play 9 league games, because right now they're still only playing 8, and the Big Ten is playing 9. And so, you know, if you want to even things out, you have to do it that way. I think what we're seeing with these types of conversations. And the fact that the Big Ten and SEC even went there back in the spring about this for the CFP is what is best for the Big Ten and the SEC. Of course, saying 3 automatic spots is best for them because then they can market around them. Like you could have like a race for the 3rd place finish, or, like, do you have a 3rd and 4th place game on championship Saturday of conference championship weekend? Like there's a lot you can do around that. So I get why they're looking at it, but I'm with you too. I mean, I think you want to have faith in a selection committee instead of taking that out entirely and just saying before any games are played, our league is better than yours. Like the SEC could get 4 teams in this year. Like you look at the top 10, there's a ton of those teams. So to me, I would just rather them get in through the process that already is weighted towards them anyway, based on the way the selection committee is going to look at those resumes from an SEC or a Big Ten team versus changing it. But it's back on the table again. And here's one important part. The Big Ten, the SEC can basically decide this by themselves. They are able to change the format with advice, but not voting power from the ACC and the Big 12. So
that is super intriguing. I'm glad you dropped that little nugget there. I just, before we get off of this topic, I do want to say there was a time in this sport, and it wasn't that long ago. I played during this time. Half of my career in this time, the other half was not, where there were only 2 teams that got a chance at the end of the year to play in a national championship game. And the New Year's 6 bowl games mattered, and all of the other bowl games, for that fact, actually mattered to people. There were people that were excited about the Idaho Potato Bowl, and it was a big deal for the teams who were going there because their programs probably achieved something that people didn't think that they could do at the beginning of the year. It's a great way for them to measure success. And here we are now, where it's like, how many teams can we get in here? Where do we stop? I asked the question. I'm going to be that guy right now, but do we look up one day and it's like, hey, we got 24 teams going at it at the end of the year?
I think it's a really good question. There was also information put out on Tuesday about that Super League proposal that we all heard a lot about in the spring and summer as well. And it's like, here are 72 FBS teams. And then beyond that, like there's promotion and relegation and, it's all centralized and you're paying players. Like there's actually some decent ideas in there. But part of the reason it doesn't get support is because there's so much power and influence and history and tradition in the way that it's set up right now. So these are all really valid questions about like where it's going. And it's weird that going from 2 teams competing for the playoff to 4 made it so much worse, like to not be in that group, even though it doubled the access.
No, and that's I guess the biggest point that I'm making. Like we were perfectly fine. Many people were living in a world where there was like the national championship game. And that was even kind of a short-lived process before teams were just claiming national titles. And now here we are.